other than Mr. Dan Doran, who I've had a pleasure to work with for many years, who is a safety manager at Turner Construction, is going to be providing this information today. Dan, we certainly appreciate you providing this information and details to our group on how this has been beneficial to you and your team throughout not only Washington State, but throughout the country. Thank you so much, Dan, for your participation.
Of course. And with that, I'm gonna take it away with sharing my screen. So hopefully everyone will be able to see what I've pulled up in just a moment.
Hey Dan, while you're setting up, I'm Brandon Hubert. I'm the safety director here for Turner in Seattle. And I just want to kick this off before Dan gets this going I just want to remind everybody that this program we call Ladders Last, not Ladders Never. It freaks out a lot of our trade partners when they get a job with us saying we can't use ladders. Oh gosh, what are we going to do? But it is Ladders Last. We want to make sure the ladder is the last and safest means to get to their work. We want to challenge them to look at other means and methods as scissor lifts, Baker scaffolds, rolling ladders, things like that before they just jump right into a ladder. The reason why we did this is because we saw a high amount of ladder incidents and injuries on our job. And it wasn't because of the ladder itself, it's because of how people use them. And so we just wanted to focus on ladder use, ladder inspection, ladder training before people just jump on them. So Dan, thank you. And
so as Brandon mentioned, I'm just going to go through our policy, kind of what to think about. Our contact information is up on the screen right now. Feel free to grab a screenshot, message us through Teams. One of the fortunate things about working in safety is we don't have trade secrets. We all have the same goal, and that's to protect people. So if you see something that you want to know more about, you want more information, you want us to share what we got, you can copy our homework. We will make it available. Please reach out to us. So I'm going to jump right in. Brandon kind of covered this a little bit, but what is Ladders Last? So this is a national policy. We started this back in 2004. This was in collaboration with our insurance carrier, Liberty Mutual, who's been instrumental in helping us guide and design our safety program. So a brief overview. The goal is, like Brandon said, not ladders never, but ladders last. Ladders may only be used as a last resort when a safer means of accessing elevated work is not feasible. If you need a ladder, it needs to be approved by Turner. So we don't just have ladders sitting around the job. We need to have an approval process in place. We have a permit. It's done with a little tag that's affixed to the ladder. It's got a daily inspection checklist on it, and there are some weekly options for that as well. But if that ladder is approved for use, we permit it. Any ladder that's not being used on a Turner project, so meaning it's not currently permitted by somebody, secured or removed. So the other part of this, it requires active management, right? It needs to be taken away. We don't want ladders laying all over our jobs because what we end up having is people just run and grab something out of a corner and end up using it. So why ladders last? So I've got just a couple of pictures here. I don't think I need to go too in depth on all of this. I think pretty much everyone can look at these and see a couple of sketchy situations. You got this edge here where you've got an elevation over a guardrail. You can see people carrying materials up and down a ladder. On the right is a picture where a ceiling light fixture fell out and knocked into a couple ladders. A large span here. Oh, actually, I'll get my laser pointer going. Got a large span on the left here. Just again a large sketchy ladder. I'm sure lots of us have walked into a room and seen something like this before. This is some of the stuff that we run into with ladder use all over our jobs. This one I thought was a good illustrating point. So this is, with use of a ladder, trying to get it done right. Here we have some install happening right near the edge of a slab on a building. You can see that this isn't exactly the best setup. You're right here by a lot of traffic. You're right here by an edge. And there's no real good way of attaching our fall protection properly. And it sure looks a lot safer. It looks a lot more comfortable for the employee in the picture here on the right where we're using a lift. So some other reasons why, just talking about statistics. So these statistics are a couple years old, but I did double check them. They still hold true today. there are a large amount of annual ladder injuries and fatalities. A lot happen while descending. And I'm sure you've all seen some of those ladders that have like the last step warning where it gives you a pronounced tick when you hit the last step of the ladder. You're 2.8 times more likely to be hurt descending versus ascending. So again, it's that coming down off the ladder, that accessing. 10% of those injuries involve handling ladders. So this is just getting them from point A to point B, moving them around the jobs. Most commonly affected by this is going to be plumbing and HVAC, followed by electrical. Pretty clear why. They have a lot of work where we install material up on the ceiling. It involves a lot of tight spaces, a lot of ladder use, a lot of reaching overhead. And 54% of these injuries are from non-productive use. So this is not actually up on the ladder installing anything. This is going up and down, moving the ladder, stuff like that. So there's a case to be made as to why we want to reduce this on our projects. So what's the actual policy? What do we do? The policy specifically is ladders are to be used only when there is no other means possible. I highlight this because a lot of times the way this gets thought of is, well, there's no other easy method, right? To truly execute this and truly have this in place, we mean no other possible means. We had a quarterly meeting a couple years ago where our company president, Peter Davern, came on and brought up the point of we don't want to ask the question, what is easiest, what is most efficient, what is cheapest. We want to ask the question, what is the safest possible way to do their work, right? And so we look to have a ladder only be used when there is no possible other means. I just see a couple comments come up. Is everyone able to see the screen? Everyone able to see the presentation? Just want to confirm.
I got it, Dan.
It looks like
Okay.
we have it.
Okay, I just saw a couple comments. Wanted to make sure everyone was still on board. Cool. Okay. Some other stuff. Part of our policy, the cost of safer means. So the cost of avoiding the use of ladders is something that's included in our subcontracts. Happens during buyout, bidding, and procurement to make sure that our trade partners are well aware of this stuff well in advance. Our preference is to use scissor lifts or other mobile elevated work platforms as the tool of choice to access work at heights. When we don't have those options, a lot of things we've gone to are scaffolds, Baker type, teletower scaffolds. Rolling stairs have been very popular and very useful for us in the past couple of years, and we'll talk about some of those options here in a little bit. And then if there is no other possible substitution, there is no other way to do it, we go back to what we talked about before. And a permit is going to be issued, and that ladder will be used for that task and that task only once it's issued and permitted by Turner. Couple of things on ladder use itself. So we don't allow any aluminum, wood, or job-built ladders. So they have to be type 1A heavy duty or extra, or I think it's extra heavy duty ladders only on site, and they have to be the fiberglass type ladder. Temporary stair towers and prefabricated stairs can be used to access different levels. Scaffolds must have stair attachments, so we don't want to use ladders on scaffolds. We want to use like trapdoors and stairs. And then we also focus a lot on prefabrication, which again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about here in a couple of minutes, so I will keep that brief for now. Lastly, the ladder tag itself. Again, I put this up on screen. Feel free to take screenshots if you want the details of this. I'll happily provide all this stuff. Again, no trade secrets. So this is the tag itself. These are basically kept in the vest pockets of all of our site leadership, safety people, superintendents, lead engineers, stuff like that. The idea being, if a trade partner wants to use a ladder, we have Turner leadership available to issue those permits to be affixed to the ladder. So the task needs to be reviewed. So when a ladder permit is requested, we have to actually go to the location. This isn't something we just write it up in the huddle and send them out. We want to go to the actual location of the work, review it, and make sure we have eyes on it before it happens. Again, it's not ladders never, it's ladders last, but in the cases we do use it, we want to make sure we're taking the appropriate steps to ensure that work is set up properly. There is an inspection checklist included on this side of the tag. You can see there's provisions on here from Monday through Sunday, so that way if we need to, we can do these ladder tags issued for multiple days worth of work, or if it's something like an access ladder during steel production or something like that, you can have it out there without having to go through and create a sea of ladder tags, replacing it every single day. One thing that I will throw out there as a potential smart move is rotating weekly colors. If we have a lot of ladder tags on a job site, which I'll talk about that a little bit later about how we can avoid that. But in the event that we are doing, multiple ladder tags for something, consider changing the weekly colors. So that way it's a little bit easier to evaluate as we walk across the jobs and as we go and assess those work areas. Lastly, one stipulation we do have is fall protection is required at all times on a ladder if you're working over 4 feet. If you can't maintain 3 points of contact, or you're working near a elevator shaft, building perimeter, or some other high fall exposure. So the picture on the left, you can see the ideal setup. So we want to have tie off overhead. It has to be an SRL, and we have that. We say do the math frequently because there's different deceleration devices on all of our fall protection gear, but making sure we selected gear that is actually going to provide a stop or a restraint, an arrest, before that employee, hits the ground. We want to make sure we're looking at our actual setup to ensure that our free fall distance isn't too large. Okay, so why bother with all this? What's in it for me? Why should I put this in place on my project? So some benefits: fewer serious injuries and catastrophic claims. I could probably just stop right there. Again, we are all here because we have a singular goal, and that's to protect people in the workplace, and this will do that. But we also have improved fall protection. It makes it a more ergonomic position for our employees to work in. I'll actually spotlight one of our trade partners, PCI DemoCon, today. They have been doing demo out here at the airport for us, and they've been doing a lot of work in prepping some steel for demolition, and that means they are in scissor lifts all day long. And what they were able to do, because they're up there for 8-10 hours a day, is they actually got anti-fatigue mats for their employees to stand on inside that lift. You can't do that in a ladder. You have to, use those rungs, and your feet have to hang over the sides. So they were able to provide a much more comfortable and ergonomically beneficial position for their employees to work in. It also gets us up to a much more comfortable height to do that work. We can have tools and materials stocked on the platform, so it allows us to keep our materials with us. We've seen some of these scissor lifts where they've got, actual toolboxes hanging off of the rails, something like that, to keep their material with them. Better productivity. It doesn't have to stop and reassess and reset up everything every 5 minutes. You can just move right over to the next space. Allows for easier installation of materials. Again, you're up at the work. It's much more ergonomically efficient, and you get a much more stable work platform. So obviously, a lot of these benefits are ergonomics. That's a lot of where we gain a lot here, but then it's also the improved fall protection. Some other stuff for those who are more statistically minded. I mentioned we started this back in 2004, and just kind of showing you our recent years. This is our reported ladder injuries, as a company. So you can see a steady decline in the amount of ladder injuries on our jobs. So it is effective in reducing the amount of claims that come from a ladder, or that come from a ladder fall or a ladder injury. So you can see how much that's reduced over the years as we continue to focus on this. Go a little bit further. All right, so how do we put this in place? How do we set it up? How do I make this happen on my project or at my company? So first thing, you have to pre-plan. That has to be a part of our planning. My apologies. It has to be part of our pre-plan. If this is not in our APs, in our scopes of work, in our contracts, it's not going to happen. It has to be bought in by every level of the company. We need to make sure that we have a plan in place to get the work done without the use of a ladder. And that does mean talking directly to our trade partners, looking at BIM, looking at lean, understanding how we can get that work done, or what changes might need to happen in our sequences to use a scissor lift or a boom lift or a scaffold instead of a ladder. Big ones here to think about are places where we have a lot of ceiling work. A lot of times we find ourselves building scaffold dance floors, so a large elevated platform, or dropping in a spider lift or a boom lift before we close up an area, so that way we can still reach that work. We want to make sure that we're focusing on installing our permanent stairs as soon as possible. I'll talk about that in just a minute. Personnel hoists and elevators getting utilized as soon as possible, and having good substitutions for ladder alternatives. So talking about our prefabrication, our BIM, prefabrication is a big one. The more time we can eliminate being at elevation, the better. So the more things we can plan out to be prefabricated before they will arrive on site allows us to reduce a lot of the time we have to spend installing it. Again, if we do have to use a ladder in some case, at least we can spend less time on it. So we talk about elimination being one of our goals when it comes to risk mitigation. And if we can eliminate time at exposure, that's great as well. Off-site construction, you can see a couple examples here. You can see some big ceiling units going in. Imagine if we had to build these on site, that's going to be a tremendous amount of hours spent working at height versus it's built somewhere else off site. We bring it in, we install it in just, maybe a few short hours, few short days, whatever that system requires in that case. But we reduce a lot of that time where we're up at height trying to get all of that work in place. So the more we can get done at ground level at a comfortable position and then install it all on the end is great. But obviously, you can see how complex these systems are. It takes a lot of time planning that way. You're going to hear me say planning and buy-in a lot. That's a lot of what's required. If our purchasing department, if our engineering department, if our 3D modeling department isn't looking at this, isn't of the same mindset, it's not going to happen. We're going to end up having to go back and we're going to have to, fight through the mess that's left behind when we didn't plan that way. So really, that involvement with our leadership, making sure it is a universal goal, is extremely important to achieving this successfully. So installing permanent stairs as soon as possible. So one of the big things we do is we fast track our stair package. We make sure that is released as early as possible so it can go up as close to the erection of the steel as we can possibly get it. This means we're reorganizing the schedule with our fabricators to make sure our stair stringers are showing up as they're needed, rather than later on the project. This helps us avoid, using a ladder to go to and from a level on a job. We want to make sure that we've got this bot with each deck install, and then also think about filling in the pans as well. It's great if we put it's great if we put up a stair, but if we don't have a plan to fill out those landings and those treads, that becomes its own tripping hazard. So making sure we have a plan in place to do that. A lot of the time, we will put in, a plywood infill for the construction phase, so that way we can do the finished concrete later on. And this also helps us to maintain our means of egress on the job and gives better access to our employees. But making sure that gets moved up in the schedule can benefit a lot of things downstream as well. So it also is one of the big packages on any job when it comes to what needs to get signed off, what needs to get completed. Our stairs are very important. The sooner it's in, the more it benefits us with getting things like punch list done, testing, balancing, and all of that stuff finished. So it does benefit the overall project schedule as well. Prioritizing the personnel hoist. So again, this stuff seems obvious, but we just want to make sure we're calling it out. Getting this in place as quickly as we possibly can so we have that access and we have that ability to bring materials from level to level and avoid the use of going up and down a ladder. So this, again, a big part of this is decided early on in the job scheduling phase. So making sure that the people who are doing that work understand that we have these goals is important. So for us at Turner, we've been fairly successful. Everyone Everyone who's involved with our buyout process knows that this is our goal, knows that these are our practices. And so both our stairs and our personnel hoists are some of the first things to go vertical on our job with steel. So focusing on that is very beneficial. Okay. So the other part of it is having alternatives, having something else we can use, having options, because the biggest thing we hear, and I'm going to talk in a little bit about some of the barriers to entry, some of the common questions and comments we get from the field, but what are the other options? There are certainly some that are clear. There are certainly some that are obvious, but there are some other options we've used over the years that have been very successful. So I'll share some of those with all of you. Okay, stairs. This one's simple, right? We want to have stairs available, whether we can do it using a suspended stair or a scaffold stair to get to and from our levels and avoid the use of a ladder, getting permanent stairs installed earlier, or the rolling stairs you see up on the top right. Those have been something that we used a lot over the last couple of years and have been really popular to do work that's on, like, just a deck that's getting that's just been poured, and you can get those out and roll them wherever you need. There's a few other options. There's like little order picker ladders, crossover stairs for going over something like, we have one out here at the airport, we're crossing over a bag belt, but there are some options out there for that. Some other stairs are like these adjust-a-stairs, these ship ladders, as some call them. So you can see here, roughly the same footprint. Doesn't really take up much more room than a ladder, but I would certainly rather go up the one on the right than the one on the left. So relatively easy to do, relatively inexpensive, especially if you buy these and keep them at your shop and send them from job to job. They're adjustable for multiple different heights. They automatically will make that adjustment as you install the stair. Pretty easy to do and gives us a much better option for accessing something. Also consider these when we talk about excavations. So this is really early in the project, but you can see on the left, another one of those adjustable ship ladder stairs going down into an actual excavation, or even pouring like a temporary set of stairs like you see on the right out of concrete so we can maintain that access.
I'm not on them, but yeah, it's good to be aware.
Was there a comment from anybody?
Sounds like somebody's microphone is on. If you wouldn't mind making sure that you mute your microphones, folks, please mute your microphones.
All good. Just want to make sure I'm not missing any comments. Okay, moving forward. Scissor lifts, boom lifts, mini mast lifts, all of the other MEP options, or MEWP options, excuse me. So this is something most of us are probably pretty familiar with. You see the scissor lifts on the left or your large platform lifts on the right. This is our bread and butter these days. This is where we spend most of our time at height on our jobs. So we've got a few different options with these lifts, and there are some considerations to make when we use these. One thing I will throw out is, our policy is 100% tie off while using a scissor lift, a mast lift, a boom lift, a platform lift. 100% tie off required in these systems. We want to make sure that we have the space prepared to do this work, and I'll talk about protecting work as well because that's a common issue. There's some other configurations. We talk about something like a boom lift. If we have something outdoors, we have the space for it, or something particularly high up. These give us great access to get exterior cladding done, get up under or over. You can see on the right-hand side where they're able to actually get up over a ledge. So these articulating boom lifts gives us a lot of additional access. The one on the left, we use these quite often, these spider lifts. These are great. You can actually fit them into most standard freight elevators, so you can get them up to an interior space where you have poor access. We use these all the time. A lot of the times you get to a point in the job where things are pretty close to being completed and you don't have open walls and ceilings any longer, but then, oh, darn it, now we have to go get this one random, light fixture done that got added after the fact. How do we get to that? Something like this can be very useful. Most of the time when we bring out something like a spider lift, like you see on the left-hand side, we look at what else can we get while it's here. We did a project for Amazon recently where we had to bring in a spider lift to get a bunch of, they were light fixtures up on our tower done. And at the same time, we were able to work with our painters and our miscellaneous iron crew to get some handrails taken care of at the same time that would have given us, some pause for concern when it comes to access. So when you bring out something like this, don't just think about how it can benefit the immediate, think about how we can, get future work out of the way while the equipment is here. We understand that I'm showing all this equipment, it has a cost. The more we can utilize it while we have it in place, the better. And then a couple other things that we run into frequently. I'm sure a lot of you have walked out into a job site and found someone standing up on the rails, either mid rail or top rail of the scissor lift, because they can't quite reach what they need to get to from the position they're in. There are some solutions out there for that. You can see a couple of them here. These are actually manufactured systems. They sit across the mid rail of your scissor lift or your boom lift, and they actually give you that extra step up to get into a tight space when we're talking about weaving ourselves in through installed MEP. So these are great systems to have available. I recommend for most people, if you have a lot of work at height on a project, have this stuff available. Don't have it be something we have to call a rental company for. Don't have it be something that we need to, source and get. Have them at the ready on the job site. Access to the right equipment is one of the biggest pushback items we get. I don't have it here. I can't get it. It will take forever. Having it ready is extremely important. I think I see a hand up by Courtney.
Yeah, I have a question about the photo on the left. I get that the step is for the elevation, but he's still tied off in the lift. But to my knowledge, most lifts don't have like ratings for like shock loading or side loading. So is that still an acceptable practice to be tied off in the lift but be above the guardrail like that?
So it's
versus being tied off overhead.
A lot of the manufacturers will have a different opinion. Most of them say you need to tie off somewhere outside the lift. Generally, that is what we will do. Is we'll find a tie-off point. Either we'll get something from our MEP trades to approve tie-off to an existing anchor, or we'll install an anchor overhead. So there are certainly options for that as well. I hate giving this answer because it's kind of, Google it, but, each manufacturer has their own rules. So it is really important that when we do this work, we are checking with that particular equipment manufacturer's guidelines because they do change. So it's important to make sure not just blanket applying a policy, but that's a good observation. Yeah, in general, we don't want to be tied off inside the lift because it is not a fall or rest tie-off point. It's fall restraint. So we would typically want someone tied off above.
Okay, thank you.
Couple of lift options. I don't need to go through every single one of these, but there's lots of configurations for these systems. One thing that does come up often, we are going to be dragging scissor lifts through our job all day, and that means potential damage to existing work. So there are some solutions. You can see on the left there's a scissor lift completely covered in padding, making sure that we don't bump into existing paint, drywall, install fixtures, whatever it might be. You can see some little foam pads here on the right that can attach to a scissor lift, a scaffold, whatever, but making sure we're thinking about how do we protect the work that's always already in place is important. A couple other things to think about with scissor lifts. On the left here, one thing that happens a lot is when we get these scissor lifts that have the extended basket on them, we'll get an employee that will go up to where their work is taking place. They'll extend out that basket to get into position, and then they just come straight down from that point and they hit something like, an electrical, system. They snag an extension cord. They hit a water line of some kind, but they come down on top of something that they weren't over before. So consider a couple of those things. Make sure those are part of our observations and our inspections. When we do extend out those platforms while we're at height, we need to be very cognizant of what's under us now when we come back down. On the right-hand side, you can see some matting that's put down just to help distribute the weight up on a foam roof membrane so we can protect that as well. So there are a few options out there to protect the work, but that is a consideration that you have to make. Switching to something like a scissor lift is not without its own challenges, so making sure we're thinking about these other things is important for success. Okay, Scaffold alternatives, I'll roll through a few of these. Likely a lot of you have seen some of these before. We've got these little power snappy mobile, small powered scaffolds. These are pretty convenient for small spaces. We've got stuff like Baker scaffold or little rolling tube and coupler scaffolds. These can be customized for the work that you're doing. They're pretty handy as well. We see this a lot of times when we talk about doing our monocoat install, our fireproofing install. But these are great. They break down really small. You can get like this whole scaffold here on the left. You can break this whole thing down to fit on a simple board cart. So you can get these into spaces, finished spaces if you're doing something like a remodel or a retrofit. It's very easy to get this stuff on site and assemble it. And again, it gives the employee a nice, comfortable place to stand rather than balancing up on a ladder. Couple more options, again, just more configurations. There's also these little like cart style step up painter scaffolds. These are great. We use these frequently and they allow you to keep some of your tools and materials with you. They're popular for a reason because they work. A couple other things. These little yellow steps here on the left, we have used these a lot recently. This is great, especially when we're talking about working out in the dirt. Gives you a nice stable platform, gives you a nice comfortable spot to work from. What we typically do, these are relatively inexpensive. We'll buy a handful of them, a couple pallets of them, 6 to 10 of them, and we just have them sitting around the job so people can run and grab them when they need them. Really obvious, big, bright and yellow, easy to move around. Those have been great for us. There's also some little portable steps and platforms and stuff that are available for use as well. And then lastly, when it comes to alternatives, just good old fashioned not having to be up there in the first place. So simple stuff like the light bulb changer on the right. I know everyone's seen it. It's simple, but they do exist. And often we just forget about those options. You can see on the left is like an overhead rotohammering rig set up with silica control and everything. But there's lots of options for extended tools that allow us to stay down on the ground and get that work done overhead. So we don't even have to get on, a scissor lift, a scaffold or anything at all. I know I'm sitting here talking about all the different options for it, but ultimately you can just put, some tool up overhead and you can get that work done without ever having to put yourself at risk. Also ergonomic benefits. Again, now I don't have to reach over the top of my head either. These have been great. We've used these a lot in recent years. Okay. Real quick, when we do have to use a ladder, so in the case that it is necessary, we do require the tie off over 4 feet like we talked about before. You want to have that SRL overhead attached to the ceiling, usually anchor in, and we have that fall arrest system. Tag filled out, but when we have to use a ladder, we need to make sure this stuff is in place. This tie-off can start getting difficult, especially as we start getting things like monocoat and everything installed. It's difficult to go get drilled into the ceiling above. So having something where we don't need to do that is very beneficial. We can do the work off of the scissor lift or something like that. There's a couple other options out there. You've probably seen these over the years. These sort of basket ladders that give you a stable platform up at the top. Here's a good example of one getting used in a wide open space. Yeah, they're pretty big and cumbersome. I will totally agree with that. And it's absolutely true, but they can provide an elegant solution in some cases. So it's a pretty good one. Okay. Yes, I'm almost done. We'll get there. In closing, so last couple items. So some of the barriers to success. Common stuff we hear is, status quo, right? We are used to using ladders. It's what we always do. Change is hard, whatever you want to say, right? Those are some of the things we're into. Making the changes not easy. I promise you, you'll reap the benefits, but we have to put in the work to actually do the change. Cost concerns. I talked about that a little bit already. If it's worked into our plan from the beginning, those concerns are alleviated quite a bit. And most of our trade partners have found that as you switch to something like a scissor lift or a scaffold or something like that, your productivity goes up anyway. And so those extra costs of buying that different equipment or renting the different equipment start to go down from there. Lack of understanding, again, making sure that we understand what the options are that are out there and sharing those with our trade partners in those early talks is important. Lack of management support. this is a really big one. If you do not have your management bought in on this, if this is not a company policy, this isn't something that can be easily done job to job. It needs to be something that's across the board. Otherwise, you just won't have the buy-in from your trade partners as well. Inconsistent implementation. So some projects are doing it and others aren't. That creates difficulty. It creates confusion for our trade partners. And then, you create a sea of yellow tags. So you can see down here on the right, this is a good example of everyone's given a ladder tag, everyone's allowed to use a ladder, and now it looks like a jungle gym on site instead of a workspace. Couple of the IRL comments we get the most, right? This is the stuff that we run into all the time as far as comments from our trade partners and our employees. A lot of concerns over a lift being more dangerous. Oh, if that tips over, I'm done for. I don't want to be tied off to something like that if it were to tip over. A big part of supporting ladders last and making these other alternatives the safer method is by making sure that our work areas are actually prepared for it. So these scissor lifts are extremely stable. They really only tip over if we set ourselves up for failure, if we have changes in elevations that aren't guarded, if we have hole covers that aren't labeled or installed, if we have edges that aren't protected or work surfaces that aren't level and training that's not done. Once that stuff is in place, the likelihood of something like that tipping over is slim to none. Not having something like a scaffold or a scissor lift nearby to use, another common one. I mentioned making sure not only that we know of the alternatives, but that we have them available. One of the more common ones is it's only going to take a few minutes. I'm sure everyone here has heard that from an employee at some point who wants to do something questionable, right? Oh, it's just going to be fast. It should take no time at all. I think I don't need to tell everyone on this call what happens when we take those shortcuts and something goes wrong. Yes, the short-term reward might be there, but long-term, when we talk about frequency, severity, of those potential after effects, it can be far, far more expensive. You might save yourself 5 to 20 minutes a couple of times a week, a few times a year, whatever. But that going wrong just one single time is going to eat through all of that gain productivity immediately. The average cost of a reportable injury now is well over $50,000. Obviously, ladders, almost every single time there's a ladder injury, it's thanks to a fall. So it's really important to make sure that we are using the right stuff from the get-go. Okay, that is it. That is our policy in a nutshell. I want to make sure I leave some time. I know we're running a little bit over time. If there's any questions, any comments, anything else you want to know, please throw that out there. If you want to just reach out to me or Brandon or any member of the Turner team, we can give you all the same information, but I appreciate your patience and your ear today. Thank you.
Well, Dan, first and foremost, while people are noodling some questions, as you have been well received in this presentation, it was fantastic information. The examples are just absolutely on point. And we certainly appreciate you taking the time and putting this together and sharing what's been successful with you and your team across the country. There was a lot of key points that I took away personally, and I'm certain that people have questions. Does anyone have questions or comments for Dan? This is an opportunity for you to ask the man himself. Go ahead and unmute your microphone and give him your 2 cents, questions, or whatever you have to say. Thank you.
Hi, Dan.
I will
This is
say,
Paul.
Dan. Yeah,
Oh,
Hey, Dan,
Gotcha.
great presentation. Glad you shared all these detailed explanations with us. I had a quick question regarding scissor lifts. So scissor lifts, as you pointed out, are a great alternative to ladders, but sometimes they're used improperly as material lifts. Can you talk a little bit about the hazards of using scissor lifts as material lifts?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So again, proper training for all this stuff, really, really important. Making sure people know how to use this stuff appropriately. When you're going to introduce a different piece of equipment, it carries its own risk. So we make sure that we've got, training to specific model types. So when it comes to scissor lift or MEWP use, it's not just a generic like, oh, I've got scissor lift training. We make sure that employees have documented training on that particular make and model. So that way they know exactly what the loading limits are, the weight limits, how much material can be brought on there. But it takes some maintenance, it takes some doing. But making sure we're identifying that for each particular piece of equipment is how you get past that. We also use, like, if anyone's here, use like a duct jack, like material, like those hand crank material lifts. We've used stuff like that in the past as well to support people working on, an elevated scaffold, platform, scissor lift, whatever it might be. There's options like that as well, so we can get the material up there. But ultimately, I mean, the reality of it is no matter what the limitation is of that scissor lift, you're going to be able to put more material on it than a guy's going to carry up a ladder. That simple. I mean, realistically, we shouldn't be carrying anything up a ladder. So even having one piece of drywall with us is more efficient than trying to do it from a ladder where we shouldn't be carrying something up in general.
Great question. More questions for Dan. Dan, I would imagine it's because you were so thorough in your explanation.